Hey guys, welcome back to Andy's Dinosaur Reviews, and today we are going to check out our very first 2022 Papo figure, as we have the Styracosaurus. Now, this Styracosaurus is nothing more than a repaint of the older Styracosaurus. So this figure, the sculpt, has been out for quite some time. Maybe that's why it was released so quickly, because it's not a new sculpt. It's the only of the new figures, because there's 3 new Papos for this year, which is still sad that we have so little continuously, but it's the only one of the new figures that isn't a new sculpt, that's just a straight up repaint. It's an interesting looking figure, I will say that, but in my opinion, it's just not quite as nice as what I'm used to from Papo. And again, I think the older one is a little nicer than this one. We will, of course, compare the two in a little bit, but at the same time, it's interesting to see Papo kind of creating a figure with a little bit of a flashier, brighter color like this, because it's not something they often do. They usually have like darker and, in my opinion, most times more realistic tones of color. Not saying that this one is horribly unrealistic, because that is definitely not the case. It's just not, again, in my opinion, as nice as the older one. But let's go ahead and jump straight to a closer look at this right now. So starting up here at the head sculpt of our Styracosaurus, you can see some pretty nice detailing throughout. One thing I actually have never done on this channel was review the Styracosaurus from Papo, so might as well take a look at the actual sculpt itself, because again, I haven't done that in the past. But you can see, again, detail-wise, it looks fairly nice. It's one of Papo's older sculpts, so I feel like it's not quite as nice as what you would see on a more up-to-date, newer version of a Papo sculpt, but it by no means is terrible. You can see the nostrils sculpted out right there, some pretty nice looking detailing in the beak area, as well as the mouth in a very gaping wide open position. You've got the tongue sculpted in there. The inside of the mouth is a black with a little bit of like a pinkish dry brushing, sort of, and then the tongue is also a pink. Not really all that great, if you ask me. There is a little bit of a gloss coat in there, which is pretty cool to see, but I just feel like the inside of the mouth could have definitely been painted in a more realistic way. The beak of the Styracosaurus as well is painted with a black, but kind of has like a green wash over it in certain areas, and has a little bit of a glossy look as well, so it kind of makes the beak stand out, which I kind of do like, but you can see that the greenish wash just almost looks a little out of place. It looks more like sloppy paint rather than actual, body color. The figure as a whole has a very, very strong dark wash, which I normally love a dark wash, but on this one, I don't know that I like it all that much. I feel like it almost takes away from the figure a little bit, because the dark wash is just so intense. You can see that we have a fairly okay looking variation of green for the body, but we have some lighter greens, almost like yellowish greens down here in the lower jaw. You can also see we have a bluish tone of color there around the eye, a very light blue. And we have an orange eye with a black pupil. The paintwork of the eye is definitely sloppy. You can see the orange has run down there underneath the eye, so not really all that great. For the horn, you can see that the horn looks really good detail-wise. The paintwork is like a variation of a brown that transitions to kind of like a white, like an off-white or a light gray, and it looks okay. They've done a decent job, I think, on that. Maybe not quite as smooth or as natural as older Papo would have painted it, but it looks okay. You also have almost like a orangish peach type color there that highlights those sort of osteoderm-like scales above the eyebrow area there of the Styracosaurus. As you run up and around the frill of the Styracosaurus, you can see we also have, some nice variations of that green, but we have some like random areas of brown, which I do actually quite like, because at least it gives it a little extra color variation, a little bit of added realism to the figure. But you can see that all of the spikes around the course of the frill also still have that same look of the brown, and then transitioning to kind of like an off-white. Some areas almost have like variations of yellowish browns, but I feel like the coloration isn't all that nice and naturally applied, and to me isn't quite up to Papo's standards, because you can see it's really sloppy. Like, there was a time where Papo's paint jobs were exquisite, if you ask me, but lately it seems like they're just getting sloppier and sloppier, and the coloration and paintwork of this one, in certain areas, almost looks like a bootleg. It's that kind of sloppy, so Papo's quality absolutely has been declining for quite some time, but we can see that it definitely isn't getting any better with this year's releases, or at least so far. But coloration-wise, again, it looks pretty much the same over here. I will say the kind of greenish wash added to the beak isn't quite as dramatic or obnoxious looking over here. It definitely looks a little bit better, but the coloration and everything still looks pretty much the same. No real difference between the opposing side of the head sculpt compared to this side. Up here on the top of the frill, though, you can see, actually on the top of the head, you can see a little bit of like a brownish wash has been applied. And then in the center areas of the frill, you can see that we have a really nice kind of like a dark outlining, and then a blue, a light blue, and then a yellow area for the center of those little oval areas there up on the top of the frill. So not really all that great, but not terrible. As you lead back here into the neck region, you can see some more decent looking skin texture, skin detail and everything. Some nice creasing there on the top of the neck because the Styracosaurus is holding its head up pretty high, so it would definitely be folding the skin quite nicely up there. You can see the rear of the frill has some decent looking detailing to it as well, kind of like a light yellowish brown. Has been dry brushed over that area to highlight the back of the frill. And then we have like an orange that runs along the scoots that run down the spinal column. It's definitely pretty sloppy as far as the application goes there. But as you reach up here into the top, it starts to look a little bit better, a little bit smoother as far as the application of the paint goes, and definitely stands out pretty nicely on the figure. You can also see we have more of that light blue that we see in the face, kind of dry brushed up there before transitioning down into the green. And then we have that dark wash again present through the course of the figure, which I'm still not too sold on. It looks okay, but at the same time kind of looks a little bit too intense in certain areas, I would say. And you can also see as we move down here into the leg sculpt, you have some more of a lighter green that picks up. You can see quite a bit of movement here. You can see like the shoulder blade tensing, some skin stretching off of the body, and some okay looking muscle definition moving down the course of the leg. But look at how horrible the paintwork is on the foot. Like that is definitely bootleg quality paintwork right there. The paintwork of the nails is just everywhere, like it's all over the toes. There was not even a slight attempt at kind of giving it a nice paint job down there. It is a glossy black that they attempted to use, but it is quite possibly one of the sloppiest painted foot sculpts I think I've ever seen. Again, some pretty nice looking skin wrinkles and stuff there in the stomach region. You have some nice muscle definition here in the thigh. You can make out the hip bone as well. And some, again, decent looking scale detail through the course of the figure. You've got the kneecap there in the front of the rear leg, as well as the calf muscle there in the back. The foot sculpt, yet again, has horribly painted nails. Like, they are just absolutely as sloppy as it gets. And then you lead back here into the tail. You can see a little bit more kind of skin wrinkling and skin movement there as you lead out the length of the tail. The tail has a pretty nice looking curve to it. And then if we take a look at the opposing side, you're not going to see too much difference because the Styracosaurus almost looks like it's, afraid of something. Like, it kind of looks like it's startled. So it almost looks like maybe it jumped and, is letting out a vocalization of fear. That's kind of always the takeaway that I had from this Styracosaurus, and you can kind of see that same type of a look through the positioning of the legs. Like, the musculature is really quite tensed in pretty much every leg you see, so that also kind of leads me to believe that might have been the motivation for the sculpt. But you can see again, paint-wise, it looks pretty much the same. I will say, though, on this side, the green, the darker green to that lighter green on the lower part of the legs is much smoother when it comes to the transition down. And you've also got the nail paint here again that's pretty sloppy. Not terrible on the rear foot, except for this toe here. But the front foot definitely has some pretty sloppy paintwork as far as the nail paint there. And just generally, again, the figure as a whole doesn't look that great as far as the coloration goes. Like, you can see we also have some more light blues down here, but look at how, like, absurdly applied it is. Like, it's so inconsistent. It's just kind of like they took a paintbrush and they went, yep, all right, we're done here. Like, there was no attempt to really give it a nice naturalistic looking paint job. So this actually might be one of, now that I've had a good chance to really look over it here in the light, it might be one of the worst Papo figures I've ever seen when it comes to the actual paint application, just because, again, it's really not what I'm used to when it comes to Papo. Like, it's really sloppy for the most part, and now I'm starting to wonder, yeah, I guess we do have a little bit of a dry brushing over here of that coloration. So, because like right here it just looks really sloppy, so I didn't know if that was just an accident, but it looks like they did attempt to paint it that way. But again, it's just really not that good. The coloration is okay that they've chosen for it. It looks alright, not quite as nice as what I would usually see from Papo, but the actual application of the paint is just incredibly sloppy through the entire course of the figure, and nowhere near as nice as I was hoping it would be. And to show you, again, what Papo's paint jobs used to look like. Here is the older Styracosaurus from Papo. Might have a little dust on it because it's been sitting up on a shelf, but just look at the paint job of this one compared to the one that we were just taking a look at. Like, there's just such a much more realistic and more lifelike look. Everywhere you look at the Styracosaurus, the paintwork is just way nicer through the course of the figure of this one. It's way more consistent, way more realistically applied. No real sloppiness or anything that I can see, like the nails and everything look good as far as the paintwork. Really, really nice, very precise paintwork through the entire course of the Styracosaurus. And now you compare that with this, and it's just like, man, what happened? Like, Papo really, really declined, in my opinion, when it comes to the quality of their figures. Just looking at the two head sculpts, you can just see so much more beauty and care was taken on the older Papo figures compared to these newer ones. So you can see again both of the different variants of the Styracosaurus that are out currently from Papo. Actually, I don't know if this one now is retired since this one is out, but this one, in my opinion, is way better than the newer version. As far as a size goes, for a length from the tail to the tip of the beak, you're looking at about 5 3/4 inches, or around the, I would say, 14.5 centimeter area. And then for a height, the highest point is definitely the tip of that horn, about 3 and, oh, I almost lost it there, about 3 3/4 inches almost, or about the 9.5 centimeter area, again approaching that area. For a size comparison, there is Mr. Papo T-Rex, the Attack Pack Colovosaurus, and Robert Muldoon from the Mattel Jurassic World toy line, next to our brand new Papo Styracosaurus, and you can see that it's really not that great in comparison to Mr. Papo Rex. That's another instance of how, nice the paint jobs were on Papo figures compared to how nice they are currently. Not that the Green Rex was the best ever, because I'm not a huge fan of the coloration on Mr. Papo Rex. I think it's okay. It's not near as nice as their promo images for it were, but definitely a huge decline in quality from that Rex to this Styracosaurus. But if you don't have the Styracosaurus, hopefully these here in comparison will help you out. Although it is a fairly older figure, and most collectors probably would either have it or have seen it. So you should hopefully already have an idea of it, again, if you do have it size-wise. But if not, then hopefully these will help you out. And then for one more comparison, again, here is the older Styracosaurus next to the newer Styracosaurus. And it almost, when you see the two standing here together, it almost doesn't look that bad, because now it kind of looks like we have a male and a female, because we have a brighter, flashier colored version with the newer one, and then a more dull, sort of a less flashy coloration on the older one. But I still 100% prefer the older one. But looking at the two of them together, they look kind of cool. And once you take a step back, you don't notice just how sloppy and bad the paintwork is on the newer one. So it kind of looks a little better from a distance. So, when you take that into consideration, it still could be a decent looking version. But in my opinion, again, the older one certainly wins this round. So this brand new 2022 Papo Styracosaurus is definitely not very good, if you ask me. The coloration and the way it's been applied just isn't really that great. The tones of color they've used are okay at best. I wouldn't say it's a good repaint, because even if they had done this perfectly and applied all of the paint with no sloppiness, I still wouldn't have been that big of a fan of the coloration. I think it looks okay for what it is, but Papo absolutely has the ability to come up with a better and more flashy and more appealing yet more natural looking paint scheme for their figure. But the actual application of the paint is the biggest problem that I have with the figure, because it's just really sloppy, doesn't look like Papo quality, doesn't look smooth or realistic. It's really sloppy through the entire course of the figure, even starting from the beak all the way out to the tail. It's just littered with sloppy paint. It has a nice dark wash that most times I would love, but when I say nice, I mean it's just cool that they have applied a dark wash, but they applied it a little bit too thick, a little bit too dark, or they just didn't apply the other coloration very well, because the dark wash kind of like almost drowns out the paintwork of the figure when it comes to like the greenish and bluish tones. And since it's not all that well done paintwork wise, the dark wash is just so heavy in certain areas that it really takes away from the figure, whereas in my opinion most times a dark wash would enhance a figure. But again, paint-wise, like, it's just really not good. Like, the sloppiness is really bad in the feet. The paintwork of the spikes and everything just not very good. Like, doesn't look smooth. It doesn't look natural. It looks almost, again, bootleg quality when it comes to this paint job. The sculpt is really quite nice. I think it looked honestly better on the older Styracosaurus because the coloration wasn't so obnoxiously applied. You could see the detail a lot smoother on the older Styracosaurus. But again, the paintwork of the newer figure almost ruins every aspect, even taking away from the sculpt, if you ask me. That being said, there is, slightly a redeeming factor, like I had stated earlier, where it looks like it's a male and female, and that, would work out when it comes to the coloration. And from a little bit of a distance, you don't notice how poorly painted the figure is. But if you have the older one, I would say the older one is better, so you don't necessarily need to buy the newer one unless you want a mating pair, and then it's an alright idea to pick up the newer one, and maybe you'll get lucky and have one that's better painted than mine. But again, if you are interested in picking a Styracosaurus up for the 2022 Papo line, I will include a link in the description to where you can do that on Dan's Dinosaurs, because that is where I purchased mine. So make sure you check that link, head on over to Dan, purchase yourself this very interesting Styracosaurus, and make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next review. Thanks for watching.